Today, I'm delighted to welcome Armand Sohet, Chief Sustainability, HR and Communications Officer at AkzoNobel, to the Digital HR Leaders Podcast. Armand, welcome to the Digital HR Leaders Podcast. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. Before we get started, can you briefly introduce yourself, your role, and also your career journey to where you got to today?
Yeah, no, thanks a lot, David. I'm really happy that you host me for that podcast. I'll start with the question how you got where you are today, because in fact, it's by walking fast. And let me explain. I was a student walking down the street many years back when I bumped into someone, and that someone happened to be my supervisor when I was an intern the previous year. And it's been a complete surprise. And he told me, he said, "Well, I'm looking for someone for the summer, someone who could automate the human resources function. And would you be available for 3 months?" And I said, "Well, it's perfect timing because I need anyway to make some money." And I said yes, and did this internship for that company. And just because we're talking about analytics and technology at the time, for few auditors would remember this. I mean, only the old guys like me. But we were still working with Microsoft Disk operating system, writing instructions, and it was even before COBOL, just to give you an understanding of this. So anyway, it was a small company, 200 people, and I think that it worked well. The database and everything was in place, and at the end of this internship, he said, "Well, if you'd like to have a job in HR, pick up where you'd like to start." It was an affiliate of a big company. Now it's Stellantis, the car company. And he said, "Tell me where you want to start and when you want to start, and you get a job." So I've been extremely lucky, and I said, I have my military duties to do, but in 14 months from now, if it's okay, I like to work in a factory to really learn human resources. That's how I started. That's the way that I got into HR, and then everything else, it's just history. Couple of steps: sales, Kaizen, strikes, unions, leadership, talent development, poor performance, and in different type of companies: automotive, pharmaceutical, defense, aluminium, electrical, pumps, and now the paint industry. And I'm working, you introduced myself, I'm doing HR communication sustainability for AkzoNobel. And AkzoNobel is a fascinating company, one of the leaders in the paints and coatings business. And what we do, and that's our motto, we paint the future. And I love it. It's really the incredible power of paint that we have in that company. We have 35,000 employees, close to 11 billion euros revenue. That's about me and the journey.
No, that's really great, and it shows the power of serendipity. Those occasional chance encounters. Yeah. It's led to a whole career.
But the reason why I say this, because it's really funny. I will long remember the thing, and it's been like, I've been extremely fortunate when I think of how tough it is for the younger generation to find the first job and to find something. I was really lucky.
No, that's really good. Well, we're going to talk quite a lot about HR technology and analytics today, and how you're using it at AkzoNobel. So let's start with HR technology, particularly in relation to HR. It continues to be a hot topic with its potential to revolutionise HR practices. As someone who's been in the field for some time, how have you seen the evolution of technology impact the HR function as a whole?
I've seen a lot in terms of impact, and when I think of the major developments, I really see 5, and I've experienced at least 5. The first one was the personal computer. That was 80s and 90s. The second one was internet. The third one is not exactly technology, but it's social media and the impact of social media on HR and the corporations. Then big data has been really a major shift for me, and finally AI. So that's the 5 major developments I've experienced. the most significant development for corporations, in my view, remains the personal computer when I think of the magnitude of the impact on corporations. However, the most important development for HR, and again, it's my personal view, is big data. Uh, and I know it's funny because big data is not a revolution in itself. It's a development, but it's a development that has made things accessible that we could only dream of before that. And I remember it was around 2012 that I discovered the ability to aggregate data and slice data with an incredible data analytics tool. I used to call it kind of Excel under steroids. But typically, for the auditors to understand the impact on HR. And I had this example. It's a vivid example of there because when we released the first version of the big data in our company, we got a standing ovation for all the HR business partners in India, in Singapore, in China. And one of the person told me, said, Armand, why didn't you release that version earlier? It would have made my life so easier. Because that person had a very difficult business review with the CEO of the company. That's the usual thing for HR business partner. There is one piece of the agenda when they have to talk about the FTEs evolutions, or wage bills, or talent. And the time they dedicated to this preparation for the business review was nearly always creating slides and finding numbers. So the way my HR guys and I think it was tough. They were just doing all these, trying to get the numbers ready. And when the presentation, the D-Day was there, if they were asked a difficult question by whoever, CEO, CFO, business guys, they couldn't really get the answer because the time they had spent was really about gathering data or creating slides and not analyzing. And the shift with big data has really been that people could all of a sudden dedicate all the time into analyzing. And it made them much, much stronger in these business reviews. That's one of the many, many examples of what big data brought. And that's the reason why I think it's been a major shift in HR.
No, I agree. It's interesting. Last week we were in Nestle were hosting one of our Insight 222 peer meetings, and we were sort of looking at how people analytics, but also HR has evolved over the sort of last 4 or 5 years, really since the start of the pandemic. And it's come a long way. And obviously you're going back to your example, then if we think even further, to the last 10 years, HR has really kind of made that shift from what was essentially a support function in the business to being a strategic partner, and clearly data and analytics has been a big part of that, because every other business function brings data to the top table. Marketing, has been doing that for probably 20 years. We're catching up a little bit in HR, and then when we started thinking about the next 5 years, we started thinking about AI. I again, as a CHRO, Armand, what's your perception of what AI is going to do for HR as well? And then maybe as part of that, are you able to share some specific examples of AI applications that you're currently using within HR at AkzoNobel, and maybe how they've improved your processes as well?
No, absolutely. But I like to come back to what you just said and the discussion you had at Nestle, because I wouldn't like people to be delusional as well, even with big data and data analytics, because I've had many conversations with colleagues from other companies and saying, how do we get there? You need as well, you have your data rights. You need to have your data collection right. And this is way more complicated than what we think. I give you an example. I have a friend of mine who is specialized in restructuring. So he's good to see CHROs, and he very often asks a simple question: how many people do you have working in the company? How many people should be impacted? And he told me more or less 70% of the people he's talking to have no answer to that question. So on one hand, you have this ability to do predictive analytics if you have your data rights, and on the other hand, you still have a large fraction of the HR population who for multiple reasons, who have difficulties to answer such a simple question. So it means that I love to dream, but before getting to the full realization of that dream, you need to have your data collection right, and it's a long work. So not for today, but just wanted to say that. Coming back to what you said on AI, I think that's what I see as big impact. It's not only for the function, but it's probably for the company. It's essentially today in the field of writing, summarizing, translating, and queries. That's what I see. There may be some other applications. In other words, as much as big data is really about numbers, about org trees and everything, the AI is something that really is helping you in the world of messaging, in the world of describing things way more, at least at my level, than getting to the numbers. And very often people said, what does it mean specifically? And I will give you an example, which is probably more for the communications department than for the HR department. A couple of years back, when I was hiring someone in my team in communications, I would really only recruit an English native speaker, either American or English or Australian. But by definition, I wouldn't trust fully someone having a good command of English to be in the role or in the lead role in communication. When I think of the last 2 years, I think that's a requirement that I've lifted. So I said now we can recruit people who are not native speaker, because they can. I mean, of course, you need to speak English, but you don't need to have this extreme finesse, because you can compensate this with the finesse of AI. So you see, that's really specific, and it has a direct impact on it broadened the scope of the talent pool. But that's really an example, because that's a live example, because I really said 2 years ago, I remember this, I said now we don't need to have that kind of restriction any longer. We can compensate. So it's a clear example. But I think that in the field of summarizing insights, that's as well very interesting. We have a platform called Elity, which is opinion survey, which is a Swedish startup doing this opinion survey, and they're utilizing integrated AI, and you can see that in the way the analysis of the comments. We have 35,000 employees. Not necessarily all of them will leave a comment, but you can easily end up with 50,000 comments. And if you're CHR, you really want to see what people think. The integrated tool you have in Relative is helping me to see a bit more than just the insight about opinions where we're getting. So I see this in all these fields. Clearly an impact in communications, probably even more. I think of imaging, typically. And queries, we have most probably like many other companies, our own chatbot, which is helping us to data mine everything related to the company. And by the way, most of the questions asked by our employees are related to HR vacations, basically, where to find information. It's very interesting to see the trend and the questions raised by people.
No, really interesting. And actually, I should have asked actually at the outset. It's interesting that your role combines HR, communications, and sustainability. I don't know if you can talk to that a little bit, Armand, in terms of why those three things together, and what that means in terms of the role, and how that benefits AkzoNobel.
Yeah, I mean, it's I said earlier, paint the future is the purpose of our company, and we have three important pillars when we think of this. So one is sustainability, and it's the most important one. We are recognized as a sustainability leader in the paints and coating industries. We're the only one having a AAA rating with MSCI as an example. So sustainability is really at the core of what we do and who we are. We have one strong element about services and one strong element on communities, collaboration with communities. We have incredible initiatives to. I have an example of someone in India, as an example, who was a former junkie who got through a rehab thanks to the painting initiatives we're doing. So we have tons of examples like this. So with these three pillars, and having them coordinated with HR, because there are lots of connection, makes lots of sense. Think of putting incentives as an example. I think we're probably to date one of the very few companies having incentives for the top 300 executives, including the CEO, CFO, on the entire carbon chains. I mean, 1, 2, and 3. So we have the entire value chain, and we have an incentive for all the 300 executives on this, because we have a commitment, external commitment, to reduce our emissions in 2030 by 50%. So it's easier to combine the strengths of the company to get to the objectives we assign ourselves in terms of sustainability. As for communication, you see that when you think of employer branding, as an example, you can much more, you can do more with the communication department in terms of employer branding than probably you could do just as HR. So there are lots of connection there, and that's the reason why I think it makes sense to have these three elements together.
No, you're right, and the way you've explained it there, it makes perfect sense. And again, it kind of elevates that HR piece, as well. You talked about data, and I know AkzoNobel is uses Cruncher. How have you seen people analytics technology impact the evolution of your role and as HR and your role as CHRO within the business?
Yeah, I'll come back to something you mentioned earlier, David, because you said marketing is talking with numbers. Finance is talking with numbers. It's exactly my observation. The basis of communication is to adapt to the language of the person you're talking to, and the language of a boardroom, the language of an executive committee, is the language of numbers. That's and you said it earlier, but I couldn't agree more. And what I think a tool like Cruncher helps you to communicate in the language recognized by executives, being business leaders, CFO, or CEOs. And it means that people analytics technology enables the HR function to put very precise and striking figures against ideas and initiatives. I don't know, but and it's still a journey when I look at some of the presentations being crafted by some of my HR colleagues. But there is a huge difference between putting words on a PowerPoint and ideas without any number, and putting numbers first with just an insight based on this to direct your initiatives. That's enormous. There are a couple of things I can do today that I could not have done that quickly a couple of years back. So, there's so many things. Answers you can give nearly at the speed of light, even live during a meeting, just being connected to the tool. So it's really, really amazing what you can do.
Yeah, and I think we talked about, how it's the language that the, business leaders speak as well. So, I mean, it obviously helps elevate the conversation for HR, for us as HR leaders, HR professionals. And a big part of empowering, of HR empowering the business, HR empowering themselves is delivering value that impacts the organization's bottom line. And I'm just wondering, have you found that the movement towards that more data-driven approach to HR, has it benefited AkzoNobel in cost savings? And if so, are you able to share any examples?
Yeah, and I will absolutely, and it not only for AkzoNobel. I think that it's been the case for the last two companies I worked for. But just for everyone to remember, it's not necessarily true for all companies. But I've been working mainly for the last probably 15 years for industrial companies, and the staff costs account for between 20% and 30% of all costs. So it means that as HR, we have a direct control on this 20 to 30%
Yeah.
base. Um, the other one being purchasing. And I will give you an example of things that probably would have taken month and month, if I mean, of analysis to bring some savings to a company. There is something that the all OD, organizational development in HR, will look at, which is called the span of control. So span of control is a bit jargon, so sorry for this, but it means just the number of employees reporting to one single
Mm.
manager. So do you have 5, do you have 6, do you have 7, do you have 8? Uh, it's a critical element, span of control, because if you have too many managers, I mean, or too little employees reporting to a manager, it means that the efficiency of the organization is low, which is one. The costs are high, and on top of this, you create layers in the organization. So it means that the people, if you have one person reporting to one, it's not really motivating. So you need to get to something which you don't have a magic number. It depends of corporations, but somewhere between 8, 9 potentially for a company like our company is a good number. But how do you bring that conversation to the executive committee? Well, when you have the data analytics tool, this is done immediately. When I said immediately, it's just like you press it and you said, what is my average span of control today? And what if I would gain 1 point?
Mm.
What if I would gain 2 points on direct reports per manager? And immediately you can say, in terms of base pay, how much you would save for the company. That's the type of things that, again, we can do today. We're doing it. I think it took me probably, you need a bit more than just seconds. You need to craft the message, to understand what you want to do. But it's the type of thing that the data analytics is bringing to the table. And if I think of my last company, in a year, when we had an 80 million euros saving plans for a company of 3.5 billion revenues, we made the plan only driven by data analytics, because you can define the plan and you can track the plan and you can give the accountability to each of the business leaders. That's absolutely brilliant. I don't know if the example is resonates with you.
Yes, yeah, I mean it does because, as you said, traditionally, or certainly if we go back a few years, it was very difficult to provide those sorts of numbers without a huge piece of manual work. Whereas now, with obviously the technology platforms like Cruncher and others, enable you to do that. And as you said, you can do some scenario planning. Okay, so what if we did this? What would the potential impact be? I think we're also starting to see now having that data available as well. If when you start to dig a little bit deeper and you say, okay, well, what makes for an effective team or for an effective manager? And sometimes that depending again on the organization, depending on maybe the type of team it is as well, you can actually see a little bit around span of control there. And as you said, sometimes if the team's too small, sometimes if the team's too big, then actually the team itself is not as effective. So it is helping provide even more science now, I guess, around what is the right sort of number for different layers of teams and within organizations. Because of course, what the data allows you to do as well is you can start to look at, okay, well, let's look at different teams. Let's look at average tenure. Let's look at location. So, some teams are probably easier to manage than others because maybe you've got everyone in front of you and maybe they're all they've been within the organization for a long time. But other teams, it could be you've got them distributed in all different parts of the world. You've got a lot of people who have maybe been in their first year of employment, and then suddenly that it's perhaps more challenging or more in more challenging perhaps for the manager to run that to and make it effective. So it just opens up so many different questions, doesn't it? I think, which is fantastic because data drives that or supports that conversation.
And you can really move from the idea to the plan into the execution. A couple of years back, all these would probably die because it was the requirement for data was so big and it was so complicated to get that you couldn't really track this. But now with this, that's you can do it, and we do it every month. I mean, this with many other things.
And that example around span of control and having the technology to support you with that, that's one of the reasons why companies make the investments in these types of technologies, of course, because it's the promise of productivity gains. I'd love to hear your take on this, and how you measure the impact of technology on productivity within AkzoNobel, but also within HR as well, because it's a topic everyone's talking about at the moment, productivity, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I know, and it's really, and it's a fascinating topic indeed. I don't know if you know someone called Robert Solow. He's an American economist, and as well, I think even got a Nobel Prize. I mean, many years back, and it's called, and he's known for the Solow's paradox, or the paradox of productivity, and and he said something I think is famous, most famous quote is, you can see the computer age everywhere, but in the productivity statistics. That's, and by the way, today, it's people are referring to this again to say, will AI make that change? So what he said, we have all this technology, we have all these things. However, we don't see productivity gains for the companies. And I agree with Solow. That's the thing. What I see, that I've seen incredible individual gains for some individuals, understanding in some areas, but collectively I've not seen it. And I will give you an example. I go back to my first story, being a student and automating the HR functions many years back. At the time, my supervisor, who helped me to move into the world of HR, said, hey, my assistant doesn't want to use a computer. She will be on vacation. Can you automate the job? Because it takes her 7 hours to just make a kind of manual dashboard for the FTs of the company. I said, I'll do this. I installed a computer. I developed something. It was not called Excel at the time. It was pretty simple in my view. And that task moved from 7 hours to 15 minutes. That's the reason why I said the power of the personal computer in terms of impact is still one of the greatest, because that's immediate. It took me not even a week to get there. So I thought, because the assistant was going on retirement, that my boss would take it to not replace that position. Remember, it was still the kind of three, productivity is everywhere. But it's not what happened. He recruited someone else with different skills and giving some of the tasks, because this one was done, but and it's something I've observed over and over. So the question of productivity does exist, of course, but you need really to have a willingness to drive your costs down if you want to see that productivity materializing. That's really my thinking, and you need to make sure that all the productivity is not consumed by your internal bureaucracy, processes, forms. And HR is not the last to do this, finance as well. The ERP system have developed the bureaucracy in a way that is just incredible. So you really need to counterbalance all these elements if you want to visualize your productivity. So yes, I believe in it, but my observation over the years is the same as Solow. I don't see it really bottom line. What I see bottom line is the drive and your appetite for driving costs down. As an example, there is one indicator that's been there for more than 30 years probably, which is the productivity of HR. And we said how many HR you need for the employees managed. Back around the year 2000, the first time I got familiar with this notion, it was probably one HR for 85 employees. And at the time when people were selling technologies and ERPs, people said, oh, we'll move to one HR for 150. But guess what? Today, and I've seen the last report from Gartner as an example, we had one HR for 75, one HR for 80. So in terms of productivity, HR per employees, we've decreased. So we are less efficient than we were 20 years back. I'm just putting specific numbers that you can really find and pretty readily available to say that yes, that's a tricky question.
It is because I think HR. I mean, I'd be interested in your thoughts on this, Armand. HR now is delivering a lot more to the organisation than it was in 2000. So you have to, I guess, yes, that what that productivity number is one indicator, but then I guess you have to look at the outcomes as well, don't you? So it's such a complex topic, because how do you measure productivity as well? Because you can measure productivity for sales, perhaps, a lot easier than you can measure productivity for other business functions. And I think this is probably the challenge that many organizations are in at the moment. Everyone expects that when you invest with technology, you're going to get more with less, but that isn't always the case, is it?
Yeah, no, it's exactly right.
But yeah, very interesting. And I guess there is then the topic, especially with technology, is the topic of generational adoption, perhaps. Different generations in the workforce tend to adapt technology at different rates. And how do you address the challenges of integrating new technologies across diverse age groups? And it's not just age, I guess it's also willingness, I guess, sometimes from people within the organizations to adapt to new tools.
Yeah, and I'm always fascinated with this tendency that we have to look at people through the lenses of generations, and because that's not the way I see it. When I look at technology, again, based on my own experience, if I had to see, a couple of factors which are helping, it's always willingness to learn and curiosity and the degree of discipline or appetite. This is way more important than your age group. And I will give you an example, because you can think of someone who is probably below the age of 30 today and working in our company. But by the time he has left the world of universities or whatever, coming into the company, very quickly he becomes as well in the same trend. And if I'm asking some people, and I've done, and I try this, I said, could you please create a digital image for that particular thing, or can you give me a summary insights of that document I've read? It's not necessarily the people who are, or you would suppose, are the most familiar to the tools we can do it. It's probably more the people who have an appetite, a way of thinking. That's really observations, because I'm doing tests from time to time on these type of elements. So if I had to say something, the key thing to make technology adopted is simplicity. That's what Nintendo really clearly understood at the time with the Wii platform, because that's what they said. They said, why the senior people are not using games? Because it was too complicated. It was a word that you couldn't access, because you put your own, the senior people would put their own mental barriers. And Nintendo decided to break it. To the point it became the blue ocean strategy in terms of, and books and everything. You remember this, it's probably 20 years back. But that's nearly the same. The simplicity of use is the key. And I will give you a last example with social media. The first time I tried social media, I was fascinated with this. It was around 2004. I said, it's cool. And I bought the first licenses from a small startup, and I said, let's go for it. It's been a complete flop. The company was not ready. It didn't work. But I said, okay. And I tried again in 2010. I said, technology is better, we'll do it. It's been a flop again. And I tried the third time in 2017. It's been a complete success. That was with Yammer at the time. Why? Yammer was integrated. The social codes had changed tremendously. I was far too early in 2004. People wouldn't dare to post things or write things without the consent of the company. You had kind of policies for everything. 2017, the technology was there. You didn't need to have passwords. You didn't have restrictions in terms of pictures and megabytes, which were the case until 2013 probably. Small things. But then the adoption went viral. For people being 20 or 60 that's my view. So make it super easy and people use it.
Yeah, I think that's really important. That ease of use. It's not if we're using something on our phone, a new app, they're easy to use. Yeah. There's no big training manual for it. It's intuitive. You can get on with it. And I think the other thing, I completely agree with you, is too simplistic to think about it in age. As you said, it's about willingness to learn. It's curiosity. that kind of culture of continuous learning that people have irrespective of age, to be honest with you, and we all need even more of now, I guess, with AI as well. You know, we've got to think about how we do things and think about how AI can help us do them more effectively, and maybe take some of the repetition and the boredom out of it, to be perfectly honest with you. So yeah, maybe as I get older, I'm a bit more sensitive to it being a generational thing. But yeah, and you're right. You can find people in their early 30s who've been out of full-time education for 10 years, and they're just as resistant to change as someone in their 60s. It's all about mindset. I think it's a really important thing.
That's it. Like, you're more likely statistically to get these people for the people you're young. Usually, that the people I'm really trying to identify in all my organizations. And when I think of my last organization, the guy who did who really put all these kind of data elements, simplification, everything. I think he was 22 years old. So, on one hand, I'm telling this, but to drive the change, when I think of my last two organizations, I took people who happened to be extremely young.
And I think what you've highlighted, Armand, is that importance that it's not just about the technology. It's the ease of use, but it's also about the change management element of this as well. If you want people to use it, you have to make it easy for them. But then in your role as CHRO, you have to role model that as well. And so does your direct team. And then others are more likely to follow that as well, aren't they? And adapt the way they're working to use the technology.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely.
So on that note, if we think about maybe that culture of continuous learning, maybe more Gen Z coming into the workforce as well, what do you think HR professionals will be? What would be some of the key topics that we'll be discussing in the next decade?
No, it's a good question. One fine morning, I woke up and I was invited the next evening for, I don't know, it was kind of a conference or something, and I said, "Wow, I mean, we've been talking about Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, but we are at the end of the alphabet. What will the HR function be talking about in the next 10 years?" So, to your questions, they're running out of topics. We are at the end of the alphabet. And then I discovered that we had Gen AI. So, and with AI, we are back to the beginning of the alphabet. So I think for the next 10 years, we'll be talking about AI. And it will be a fascinating topic because today we don't know exactly what it is. And I remember that now that it's a reality, take home office, hybrid work, or the ability to just the way we interact today we could have imagined this like in 2000, let's say 2004. That the date when I had my first interview with what was the name, Skype. So it worked already, but it was cumbersome. It was complicated. It was breaking all the time. So again, when I think back of 2004, the couple of things we knew, like home office, but it couldn't work because the technology or the mentalities were not there. But we've been talking a lot about this without having true elements of experience. And I think by the time AI will have fully been onboarded, we'll move to the next topic. I don't know. Probably it will be something else.
Which we can't predict yet at the moment. But maybe continuing on the AI theme, Armand, if we think, what is the role of HR around helping organizations? And maybe there's two elements to it. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I guess organizationally, we need to support the company with the shift towards AI and looking at what that means in terms of workforce planning, what that means in how we're going to work, and clearly data can support that conversation. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And then the second part is, what does it mean for our HR programs that we deliver to employees and managers within the organization? And yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on those two areas really related to AI.
What I hope, looking forward, and what I hope all these technologies will provide is simplification. Because let's take another topic in HR, which is really critical for many people: stress, well-being. I mean, that's topics emerging. Someone was asking me that question about stress yesterday, and said, what are the programs around stress? I said, you can have programs to fix stress, but you can as well look at where it's coming from. So you may have different sources. Sometimes it's coming from, and very often directly from your boss, because your boss is not really the right manager, the right leader you could expect, and he's not making your life, or he's not making the work motivating enough. Sometimes it's your colleagues. But there is as well a large fraction of this frustration that I see in the workforce for years now, which is the ability or the lack of ability to make an impact on the things you have there. And at every level, can I control my environment? Can I make an impact? Is it simple? Is it simple to do a job Rex on success factors? Yes or no? Is it easy to get an approval from my manager? Yes, no. Should I delegate this to a manager and saying it's accountability, or should I, on the contrary, make that task invisible so that the manager is focusing on the customers instead of focusing on internal processes? So when I think of the role of human resources today, in the next years, it should be to make sure that all this technology, all the things we're doing are aiming at making the life of people much easier, to navigate in a company in a much easier way, so that all this burden that I can feel through the opinion surveys, through feedbacks I'm getting, so that this is decreasing. So to some extent, I would advise HR guys to nearly measure the complexity of an organization. I don't have an index for this yet, but I'm thinking about it. All the time, you break things down, you make it more complex, you add time, you add complexity for people. People are less effective and they're more tired. That's what I think HR should be doing, utilizing technology in everything HR is doing.
Yeah, and I think it's almost, from listening to you there, Armand, it's almost like, how can we use the technology to reduce the amount of friction?
Yeah.
But to getting things done, as you said, big organizations have lots of processes and lots of bureaucracy in place. So how can we use technology to maybe make the process easier, simplified, still have the rigor that we need within it and the checks and balances and the governance and everything, but how can we reduce friction? Because ultimately, if things can happen quicker and smoother, then we should get positive results out at the end of it, shouldn't we? So.
But again, that's an enormous challenge. Because when I look at the past years, some of the technology that we have introduced have led to increased complexity, not to increase simplification. So all this, and I tend to say technology is a good servant, but is a dangerous master. And we should always think of technology as something helping us, not directing our actions. So no matter what technology we're using, the first thing should be the thinking process. Where do we want to go? An aspiration, and an understanding of the situations. Because if you just let the technology being deployed without thinking about the consequences, then it's dangerous for organizations and for people, in my view. Incredible help, but can be dangerous as well.
Yeah, we've always got to be conscious of that. So, last couple of questions, Armand. Firstly, AI is developing. We've talked about it quite a lot today. It's developing rapidly. We think 2 years ago we wouldn't have been talking about Gen AI, and now we are, and now everyone's talking about it in our industry. Do you think we're ever going to fully understand it?
No. No. Now my answer is no. I don't think we will understand it. I'm not even sure we understood some of the past technologies already. When I said we, I'm talking about users, but even some of the people working in that field. And I think that if I think of the IT departments today, or people being specialized in computer sciences, I doubt if they understand exactly all these kind of sequences. So, and I think this will be it will be even more complicated to grasp fully in the future. It doesn't make me super anxious. I don't think that I'm not describing a kind of catastrophic scenario like Terminator, when you see the machines taking control over the world. But there is an element of something that will escape us, but it's already the case with many other technologies. It's not something that is new with Gen AI, in my view, when I think of it. There always been a part of mystery. This superpower that it's giving, it's kind of these are superpowers, but there is part of the a mystery of the superpowers, and that's probably the reason why you have so much anxiety around the topic.
Yeah, yeah. It's the unknown, I guess, which gives the anxiety, I think, as well, isn't it? So this is question of the series, Armand, and I'm going to ask you a follow-up to this as well, but I'll start with a question. So we're asking everyone in this series of the podcast, so there's 5 episodes. How can HR leaders use analytics to uncover and address inclusivity gaps within their organizations?
I know you say inclusivity, but I start with diversity to start with.
Yeah.
Big data is typically something that is tremendously helping an HR organization to close that gap. Gender diversity is something that you can easily isolate. You can give targets to people. You can explain. You can build the indicators that will help you to get to where you want to go. As an example, we have a target to get 30% female leaders in our top 300 leaders by the end of 2027. That's a commitment. That's as well an incentive that we've put in the long-term incentive plan for the 300 key leaders of the company. So we're serious about it. But we can track this, and we can as well put other elements like how many people are we recruiting just a level below. As an example, we know that if in the company we have somewhere around 27% women, and we want to increase the seniority at 30%, then you need to hire slightly more women at just the level which is a feeder to that senior executive level. And that's something you can measure. You can give target, and it's happening today, and we're getting to that curve. That was for diversity, and it's really specific. That's an example. Inclusiveness is more qualitative, and I think on this, that's where AI can play an incredible role, because that's capturing the sentiment of a company. I was talking about opinion survey earlier, but there's some other tools. It's much easier for AI to answer questions on inclusiveness, to see what is the perception through the comments, through the people, and it helps as well to close that gap. Opinion survey is really a good place anyway to be, because you have specific questions about diversity and inclusion. So we directly ask these to people, but we can, with AI, analyze the sentiment in a much better way.
And then just to follow up to that, really, as a CHRO, or having the CHRO responsibility along with sustainability and communications, how does people analytics and platforms like Cruncher, how does it help you as a leader in your role?
Well, it's fantastic. I think I'm a lucky person, because the heavy lifting has been done before I joined. I mean, the last 2 companies I had to design, to build, and to go through all these very complicated steps of understanding what is FTEs, what is there, how you organize. All this has been done. When this is done, and you put an element like Cruncher on top of it, then you have everything available. The only thing that you need to do in a role like my role is to make sure that you make sense of what is available. And that's probably where experience matters, because you have so many data available that you can be lost in this ocean of data. But if you know exactly where your priorities lies, you can put Cruncher at the service of delivering your objectives. In our case, if I said earlier, simplify, develop, empower, that's my 3 priorities as HR for the next 3 years. I know that I can use Cruncher on each of the 3. I can use Cruncher to define the degree of simplification. I was mentioning span of control. Develop, I can see exactly if we are recruiting people from the outside or if we are developing them from within, which is one of my key indicators. Build versus buy. And I want to get to a level of 70% of all promotions being done internally. And this is something I can measure. And empower, which is probably less with Cruncher, was with engagement and what I was referring earlier. But all these are tools which help you to define or redefine your objectives, to track them, and as well to embark all the leaders of the company with you.
That's really good. That's a great place to end it, I think. I love that simplification, development, empowerment. Good, really good strategy, I think, for HR. Thank you so much for joining me today, Armand, and sharing your time and expertise with listeners. Before we part, can you let listeners know how they can follow you on social media and maybe find out more about AkzoNobel?
It's pretty easy. I mean, for me, LinkedIn, that's my place. That's where you find me. That's usually where I interact with people outside the company, and that's the way I keep relations. And for AkzoNobel, the website of AkzoNobel is pretty easy, accessible. You have as well the LinkedIn pages. That's as well where I would advise people to go to get a better flavor of the stories of the company. That's where, as simple as it is, I would advise people to get to know us.
Fantastic. Well, thanks very much. Really enjoyed our conversation, Armand, and hopefully next time I'm in Netherlands, we maybe bump into each other at one of these conferences, perhaps.
Yeah, no, many thanks, David. It's been a pleasure, and talk to you soon again, I hope.
Thank you.
In this series, we will be speaking to a range of senior leaders who are pushing a data-driven and digital HR agenda. Make sure that you subscribe via your podcast app of choice and also via our YouTube channel for free and regular interviews with the digital HR leaders of the future.